And hello, everyone. Great to be here today. Just wanted to quickly tee up our program with a few thoughts about our goals for today's session before we get into it. So first, navigating AI is a topic that NASA, state arts agencies, and the field at large will continue to discuss over the long term. I don't think we'll solve it during this one webinar, unfortunately, but we do see this as an ongoing topic to address in a fast-moving environment. Also, we understand that there are many layers to the implications of the AI for state arts agencies. There's large social implications inherent with any transformative technology. There are policy implications that will affect state and federal government operating environments. There are implications for artists, the creative workforce, and intellectual property. And there are specific implications for how state arts agency staff and councils are able to do their work, providing grants and services to artists and arts organizations and increasing access to the arts for all. So today, thanks to Chelsea at NCSL, we're taking a high-level view of the state policy environment surrounding AI and how new and emerging policies are affecting state government agencies. We'll then reflect on those implications during a discussion with our colleagues in Arkansas and in California. And during that discussion, as Eric mentioned, we're also encouraging everyone to provide your thoughts in the chat because another purpose of our conversation here is to understand the areas of hope and concern around AI in the State Arts Agency network. So thanks for allowing me that quick setup, and I will pass it over to Chelsea.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Great to see everybody on this call. I'm going to share my screen now and go through a few slides during my presentation. Thanks for your patience while I get this up. Great. Well, as Ryan mentioned, my name is Chelsea Canada, and at the National Conference of State Legislatures, I cover privacy and technology topics, including AI on the state policy team based out of our Denver office. It's my pleasure to be with you today to share insights on a quickly evolving area, AI regulation and investments across the states. Before I get started, so you know who NCSL is and where I'm coming from, NCSL is the country's most trusted bipartisan organization, serving legislators and staff for 50 years. We serve all 50 states, territories, and commonwealths. NCSL is headquartered in Denver, Colorado, where we provide comprehensive and unbiased research on state policies and legislative institutions. We also have a small office in Washington, D.C., and their work focuses on ensuring state legislatures have a strong, cohesive voice in the federal system. At NCSL, we do not make policy recommendations, nor do we advocate for certain positions amongst states. Instead, we promote policy innovation and facilitate communication amongst states, and we do this because we believe in the importance of the legislative institution and know that when states are strong, our nation is strong. The concepts of AI were first discussed in the 1950s. In the last decade, the rate of adoption and use of this technology has increased exponentially. And at NCSL, we've tracked AI-specific legislation over the past 6 years. And as you can imagine, the number of bills in this area introduced each year continues to increase. With no major federal legislation enactments focusing on regulating AI use and/or protecting people from potential harms of AI and other automated systems currently in place, states are moving ahead to address potential harms from these technologies. We've seen bipartisan efforts in state legislatures really trying to seek a balance between protecting citizens while also enabling innovation in state government services and the commercial use of AI. Momentum continues to build, and in 2024 and 2025, state legislators across the country have been busy in this area. Next slide, please. In both 2024 and 2025, all 50 states who had a legislative session, including Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia, introduced legislation on this topic. And over 500 bills and resolutions were introduced across the states in 2024. 31 states, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, ended up adopting resolutions or enacting legislation in this area last year. Next slide, please. And then the next one as well, to the next map. This year, momentum continues to grow. We've seen, again, all legislatures across the state introducing bills in this area. We've seen over double the amount of pieces of legislation introduced in this area this year. So, the legislative tracking that I do right now, we're about 1,200 individual pieces of proposals floating out there. And 38 states have adopted or enacted a new measure, 100 new measures this year. Next slide, please. Here's a graph that shows the types of bills introduced across the states in 2025, and you can see categories range from housing to energy use to creating new crimes, among other topics and strategies, and bills specific to the private sector, government, responsible use, and education use continues to take the top spots over the last few years. Something to note that's new this year is health use related bills has continued to increase, and they took a new top spot this year. Next slide, please. The life cycle of an AI system includes the design, the development, the deployment, and the use of the system. And we've seen that risk can develop across multiple points within the life cycle, influenced and impacted by many actors, such as developers, deployers, end users, and the public. And strategies for regulating AI can range from looking at the technology explicitly or focusing specifically on its impacts and uses. Evidence and proposals from the state, federal, and international stage show that leaders on all levels are really grappling with many legal and societal impacts the technology can have. And on this slide, I have categories of considerations that have come up regarding AI governance in these conversations. Quickly moving around the circle, privacy and data protection. Since AI needs data to function, some state lawmakers are looking to put in place or expand existing consumer data privacy laws to apply to automated decision making. State legislators are also focused on transparency. We've seen some bills coming out in this area that require disclosures that AI have been used. This strategy has been particularly popular within the requirements around political advertisements, and a few states recently have proposed legislation to require watermarks on images created by AI within that transparency bucket as well. Third, when talking about the decisions and actions of an AI system, the question of who bears responsibility has emerged. If a person is denied access to loans or housing due to bias in the AI system, or if an AI system failure results in other harms to persons or property, how should fault be apportioned and should any remedies be available to help ensure that the mistake will not be repeated? Consumers are really concerned about potential constituent and consumer impact. They're also really concerned about the potential for decisions made by machines to be biased and potentially discriminate against consumers. And finally, the rapid development and emergence of generative AI has bumped up against copyright and intellectual property rights. AI developers are facing lawsuits brought by content owners and copyright holders who argue the developers have built and trained their AI models using large quantities of copyrighted material. Next slide, please. Although not directly related to state art agencies, I do have an example of how questions around creative industry impacts have bubbled up around the country and how state entities may be involved in the unfolding of answers to bigger, broader questions in this space. This is a picture of the first place winner of a digital arts competition at the Colorado State Fair in 2022. The award-winning submission was created using Midjourney, an AI program that can turn text descriptions into images. The artist posted his award online, and the debate went viral about what constitutes art. Even after judges for the competition were made aware that the piece was created using AI, the judges stayed firm in their determination and pointed to how the artist didn't break the rules because the definition of digital arts in the application process was artistic practice that uses digital technology as a part of the creative or presentation process. Following the competition and the popularity of the piece online, the artist applied to copyright this work, and the U.S. Copyright Office rejected his application because the image was found to contain too much AI generated material to be copyrightable. And guidance from the Copyright Office outlines that humans may use AI to help create art, but the question is how much control and direction the human had over the work. Since then, the Colorado State Fair has changed their rules specifying that AI may be used, but it must be disclosed when artists are submitting their work. Next slide, please. And then the next one after that. State legislators have been busy discussing and determining how the government can and should use AI. State legislators considered over 150 bills related to government use of AI in 2024. And again, the same number of bills were introduced this year in this area. Approaches vary, but there are commonalities amongst how states have decided to regulate, oversee, deploy, and measure AI in government. You can find more information in the brief from the NCSL's Task Force on AI, Cybersecurity, and Privacy that's linked in my resource slide. What we've seen from our research is that state legislators, governors, and state agencies have considered various means to study and drive the use of AI for improving and transforming government services and identifying its potential risks. States across the nation enacted laws creating new entities to study and recommend the use of AI or integrate this work into already established bodies. We've seen at least 10 states. That number is increasing, so there may have been a few more states that have done this approach this year, but at least 10 states have instructed state agencies to inventory and describe AI applications within their operations and describe the impact on the services that they deliver. And then also to address concerns around potential bias, discrimination, and disparate impact. States like Connecticut, Maryland, Virginia, and Idaho have mandated that state agencies run impact assessments to ensure that AI systems in use are ethical, trustworthy, and beneficial. Next slide, please. State legislators or state legislatures have also established new offices and other authorities to oversee AI implementation and make recommendations. For example, Florida created the Government Technology Modernization Council in 2024 to be an advisory council within the Department of Management Services. This council will study and monitor the development and deployment of new technologies and must provide a report with recommendations to the state legislature. At least 30 states have issued guidance on state agency use through governor executive orders, agency collaboration, rulemaking, and state legislation. Common elements of state guidelines include specifying roles and responsibilities, guiding principles, new processes, training requirements, inventory requirements, and those impact assessments that I just touched on. State employees responsible for information technology and purchasing are also incorporating considerations for AI within their current procurement processes. For example, California released guidelines for public sector procurement uses and training for generative AI. In order to use a generative AI product, state entities must go through a multi-state process that includes outlining a problem definition, assessing impacts, and requiring a human to be in the loop. State entities are also allowed to submit budget requests through their annual budget process for generative AI proof of concepts. And California requires state purchasing officials to take training on how to identify generative AI purchases as well. Next slide, please. AI applications are currently in action in state government, initiated from the state legislature, executive actions, or agency-specific actions with aims to transform government services. State legislatures are not only regulating AI's use, but also investing in the technology and the uses across state government. Some states have enacted legislation that includes funding for specific AI use within specific applications. And I'll highlight a few for you so you can see the range. For instance, in Florida, the legislature appropriated funds to the Department of Health for the deployment and development of an AI customer service solution. Ohio's legislature appropriated funding for a Department of Medicaid pilot program using automation and AI to provide program savings. And in West Virginia, they created a pilot program to incorporate machine learning, AI, or other advanced technologies to assess state roads. Additionally, I looked in publicly available inventories states are starting to publish and did not find specific use cases from state art agencies. But this doesn't mean that states aren't deploying these tools in these specific instances. State legislatures are starting to get their hands around current uses, and some states don't have requirements currently in place to report these uses. I did find some examples that may be relevant to your work on how state agencies are using AI-powered tools for grant making. I'll highlight a few states. So in Vermont, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is using a new AI-powered tool that simplifies grant processing, disbursement, and project monitoring. According to this agency, this upgrade promises to reduce administrative tasks, improve data handling, and enhance reporting. In Massachusetts, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs is proposing to use an AI tool to predict grant program eligibility for entities applying for grants. And the Kentucky Transportation Council uses AI tools such as Sony CI and Soundstrip for content creation within the materials that come out of their department. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, states are taking a varied approach to how they are drafting legislation, and some states are targeting specific uses and sectors, including the creative industries. Existing federal law through copyright provides authors of original works of authorship with certain rights and protections. Existing federal law generally gives the owner of the copyright the right to reproduce the work and the right to distribute copies of the work to the public. Additionally, signed into law in 2025 is a new federal law requiring online platforms to remove non-consensual intimate images, including deepfakes, when notified by victims. Although the federal government has jurisdiction over copyright, states have been active in trying to fill the gaps in current law based on concerns they're hearing from constituents. Next slide, please. At least half of states passed over 40 new laws for deepfake technology, which uses AI to create false audio, images, or video. Most of these laws are focused on sexually explicit deepfakes and deepfakes in the elections and political messaging context. But states also have laws protecting the publicity rights or name, image, and likeness for performers. And some states are expanding current laws on their books to include protections against synthetic replicas. The right of publicity is generally understood as the right to exploit the commercial value of a person's identity and allows the cause of action for the commercial exploitation of a person's name, voice, or image to prevent others from doing so without their consent. Arkansas enacted a new law this year that creates protections for an individual whose photograph, voice, or likeness is reproduced through means of AI and used commercially. California's Assembly Bill 1836 amends California's post-mortem right of publicity to protect against the unauthorized exploitation of digital replicas of deceased personalities. Effective earlier this year, it's now illegal to produce, distribute, or otherwise make available the digital replica of a deceased personality's voice or likeness in an expressive audiovisual work or sound recording without prior consent. There's some exceptions within the law, such as use in documentaries, news, criticism, satire, or parodies. Tennessee amended its longstanding Personal Rights Protection Act through the Elvis Act to include protections for stimulated voice and clarifies when use of an individual's name, photograph, voice, or likeness is expressly deemed a fair use under copyright law. Violations of the new Elvis Act can be enforced in a civil cause of action and criminally enforced as a Class A misdemeanor, which just for context, it carries penalties of up to 11 months or 29 days in jail and or fines up to $2,500. Next slide, please. The training of AI systems have also brought up questions around copyright. Many cases are making their way through the court system right now to see how far current protections go. But states have been creative with how they are introducing legislation in this area to fill perceived gaps. So Arkansas, for example, enacted legislation that clarifies who the owner of AI-generated content is, which includes the person who produces the data or input to train a generative AI model, or an employer if the content is generated as a part of employment duties. The new law also specifies that the generated content should not infringe on existing copyright or intellectual property rights. California introduced legislation this year that require a developer of a Gen AI model to document any covered materials that the developer knows were used by the developer to train the model. Maine introduced legislation that directs the State Arts Commission to study federal and national efforts to protect artists from copyright infringement by businesses and others promoting, creating, disseminating, or using AI software applications to monitor educational use of copyright work. And then in Pennsylvania, they introduced a House resolution directed at Congress, urging them to amend copyright law in a variety of ways, including specifying that the feeding of copyrighted works known as scraping into an AI program is not subject to fair use doctrine. Next slide, please. Here's a link to NCSL resources focused on AI policy. The link to the AI policy toolkit at the top of this list is a web page that gets updated monthly and captures AI-specific policy resources published across our organization. It includes legislative tracking pages, briefs, podcasts, and news articles that we publish. And finally, the last slide has my contact information. So as I shared, all of this research is publicly available, but always happy to take questions from folks if they want more detail on some of the information captured in those resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsea. I really appreciate that overview of kind of what we're seeing on the legislative landscape nationally. I have a couple of questions from the audience. If any of the rest of you have questions, please drop them in chat at any time. I'll get to as many as I can. First question, is federal policy or the lack thereof affecting state policy landscapes in substantial ways or in specific ways?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I did mention that there was one significant piece of legislation that was passed on the federal level this year related specifically to sexually explicit deepfakes. But I would say the driver behind what I've heard from our members across the country is that the driver behind a lot of these proposals or are gaps or protections that they perceive aren't being provided right now from the federal government. And so it's a quickly evolving area. Our members were really concerned this summer when there was a provision within the Big Beautiful Bill, as it was dubbed, to preempt state legislation in this area. So we saw, our members show up in droves, really advocating for the solutions they're putting in place at the state level and, asking for the federal government to work together with them.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. I have a couple questions now. One, regarding kind of grant making, particularly from state agencies, are you seeing any legislation or any kind of trends towards enforcing transparency when AI is used within grant making bodies at the state level?
That's a really good question, Eric. Like I mentioned, states over the past few years have really started to take action in this area, but the initial action has really been trying to wrap their arms around, what is currently in place and what's being deployed. I think what's challenging is that, as you all know, a lot of the products that we already use day to day have some sort of AI component already embedded into them, which is making the discussion a little more complicated. But, the trends I shared from kind of the state legislature perspective on state agencies' actions in this area, from what I've seen, haven't gone so specific into grant making. It's mainly been focused on kind of the purchasing of the products that would be used within the state agencies, services that they provide to the public. So I did do, a double look at kind of our research that we've been compiling on that area, and I didn't see much specific to grant making, but I did highlight a few areas where states are exploring, AI tools for within the grant making process.
Great. Thanks again. I have one more question. Have enforcement efforts against AI copyright infringements been effective, or are you expecting any regulations that could affect models that have already been trained on those materials?
That's a good question. And as I alluded to, the ground is really shifting in this area. As a quick example, lawsuits are currently making their way through the courts. And, as you could see from the news, like it's shifting every day. So, for instance, a US district court this summer ruled that Anthropic's use of books to train their AI model was acceptable, and it was okay under the fair use doctrine under copyright law. But there was a different piece of kind of an allegation that Anthropic was using pirated content that the court allowed to go to trial. And just this week, there was kind of a like land breaking lawsuit, and the Anthropic agreed to pay authors 1.5 billion. And so I'll just highlight that because when I was watching this court case go through this summer, some folks were questioning like the court's decision of like, hey, some of this was allowable. And so the other question mark was like, what was going to happen with kind of the piracy claims? You could easily Google that story and find out more. But yeah, it's quickly evolving and changing every day.
And another quick question came across about AI and copyright. Um, it, is it correct that copyright policies determine if a person could copyright something depending on how much AI was used to create a particular piece? In other words, is there a percentage of AI that is allowed or non-allowable to be input into the work? Have they determined what that percentage is?
I would say, the U.S. Copyright Office has issued ongoing guidance in this area since 2023. So I would also, that's publicly available. So Google that guidance because it is being updated. But yeah, I haven't seen a certain percentage, but the Copyright Office is saying that, that is a part of their determination of if it is copyrightable, how much human input was contributed to the overall work. But I would say I don't think a specific percentage has come out per se yet.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. And thanks once again for the great presentation. We'll have your slides up on our website for everyone here so they can get to the links shortly after this session. If you'd like to stick around, we're going to shift gears a little bit here, and I'm going to bring Ryan back on. He's going to lead Scarlett, Matthew, and Rebecca in a roundtable discussion about how they're seeing it affect their own work at their state arts agencies. And we also encourage you all to respond to the roundtable discussion in chat, telling us what your perspective is around those questions. Ryan?
Great. Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Chelsea. Really appreciate that overview and appreciating the complexities of these issues and how difficult it is to sometimes make the connection around the policy environment now and how it might be affecting our agencies. But to try and help do that and just talk about the state arts agency perspective, we have our great panel here and a few questions to discuss. So I'll go ahead and get us into it. So first question is, and Matthew, I'll send this over to you first. Um, is there recent legislation or state policies, so not necessarily legislation that's been passed, but other policies or regulations in your environment on AI that are affecting your agencies, or that might be coming down the pike soon? Any reflections on that question?
Um, Affecting our agency specifically, I don't know if I could speak to that at this exact time. What I could say though is that there are several um, uh, policies or legislative bills coming down the pipeline um, that are pending or going through the process that could impact many agencies, including our own at some point. There are not just on the arts side of things, but there are some bills that have to do with like monitoring, like how an employer monitors their employees. I know that the Labor Fed was sponsoring a couple of those bills that had to do with that. Concerns such as an employer knowing that one of the employees was like pregnant before she had even told the employer that she had that going on, and that people's personal lives and private information being seen by their folks before that. Also AI systems. I think it's SB7 that's out here in California right now. Um, that has to do with using AI to make any kind of decisions on employees, such as hiring, firing, giving them a raise, contracting, things like that. Those AI systems, there's this bill would sort of regulate the use of that or notification for the people who would be impacted by it due to um, the AI, they're due to concerns with the AI either making questionable decisions based on someone's race, ethnicity, gender, and then offering, hiring, firing, financial payments in sort of a biased way. Not sort of a biased way, in a biased way, because AI is designed by whoever created it, so it's going to have whatever biases that had it there. So there's just things like that, I'd say. Sorry if I'm talking too long, but there are certain policies that I think would affect multiple agencies, not just CAC specifically. But I know Rebecca, I know that you know more about CAC than I do. So if you'd like to add anything, please feel free.
Rebecca, anything to add or?
Oh, I know. I thought we were going in an order, so I wanted to say that.
Yeah, all good. Sorry.
Thank you. That's so nice. Um, I am just gonna jump in here. I just wanted to thank you so much for having me on this panel. I really appreciate it. I'm Scarlett Sims. I'm with the Arkansas Arts Council, and I just wanted to point out that Arkansas is a lot different landscape. So we are a very rural state. We're small. We have about 3 million people, and as that the Arts Council is funded, we're a lightly funded. I mean, we're more. We have like $2.2 million in funding overall in our entire budget. So we're not a huge organization. That said, we are starting to see some policy and law legislation related to artificial intelligence that is impacting what we do. In fact, the state recently passed a policy and law to make us more transparent and to start thinking about how we use AI and how that can be used in the future. I wrote it down because it's AI usage policy. Didn't really just shout like remember me. So we are starting to look at like how we do it. We've had different meetings that included like, are we using Photoshop or generated ideas? How are we using this in our marketing tools? How are we using it when we're considering language? As for the opportunities are also there. So that's part of the challenge, is just sort of getting on the same field as what the state would like us to see. But the state definitely wants to have control of its own legislation and does not want it mandated from the federal government. That's just from the past. That said, we are interested in finding out like how we can harness the power of AI to benefit rural residents in Arkansas and rural applicants. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now and how it's impacting us. So
Great, thanks. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just add on and just thank you also for inviting us to be on the panel. And I just love the way that this panel is constructed because of Scarlett's really unique, sort of the perspective across the entire country. But just to reiterate things that Chelsea was saying, a lot of the focus that kind of intersects with CAC has to do with transparency, but this kind of thing that the state government is both on one time, really seeking on how to leverage in for all state systems into AI technology from the point of view of efficiency. The governor did actually promote and has an executive order all around government efficiency that leans heavily on technology and AI in a range of different ways, and some of the offices that are really about technology and data in that regard. And that will affect every single agency at some point, we just don't know for California Arts Council itself. At the same time, there's also a really strong concern about the use of AI related to transparency and things that Chelsea talked about in terms of creating these learning language model systems, as well as the use certainly for ourselves. And we'll get into that in one of the other questions, I think, around what does that mean for grantees? What does that mean for grant allocations processes and things of that nature? So it's this interesting sort of balance of leveraging, concern about transparency, and concern about the impact on literally the economic engine of the creative workforce here in California.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And, one thing that I'm hearing is that it is not necessarily just about how a state arts agency is affected, but these are the types of, these technologies are affecting all sorts of business practices, right? So HR implications, as Matthew was talking about, just normal business practice for how we're able to do work in the software that we're using and how AI is integrated in those softwares. And so there's certainly a layer of how government is able to deploy technology in these things, but these are also affecting everyone, right? So yeah, moving on to the next question and related to the thought about how it's affecting everyone. And this will go to Scarlett first. How do you see AI currently affecting your grantees? Is it causing any challenges or perhaps positive outcomes that you are observing from your perspective?
So yes, the positive outcome, I'll take that first. That one's the easiest. Arkansas has a very high illiteracy rate. We also have a poor education system and a debilitated economy when it comes to workforce development. So AI has really helped actually a lot of our artists, specifically in rural and underserved or geographically isolated areas, which is a large swath of Arkansas, to help them actually write the grants that would be required to go through our system. So writing is a huge component even now of our grant process. And that has always been problematic, including actually access to the technology to even start the writing. So between video, being able to put up videos or use those links or really work with us in even developing AI or using that to get a sort of a jump start on how to start the process has really been beneficial for individual artists, especially. I think a lot of nonprofit organizations have someone dedicated or have a volunteer dedicated to grant writing specifically, and that's a different area than what I actually deal with. But as far as individual artists, a lot of times they don't have that same kind of access or support. And so the AI component has really helped them kind of, I guess, massage what they have already written into something that is much more palatable for larger institutions that do fund individual artists, not just us. So that would be the greatest opportunity. I think the greatest challenge is definitely, well, we have a lot of broadband deserts, internet access issues. I think it's going to be more and more difficult for people who don't have access to get that access and to move up people and to reach out to them. So I think those are the biggest challenges to me, is being able to bring everybody up to the same playing field.
Awesome. Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you. So I think for us, it's a little bit more murky as far as I know. This is really the first year in some ways that it's been more in the conversation around the application process, as you alluded to, Scarlett. However, we're not really telling people to use it or not use it. When they ask questions, it's really up to them. Is honestly, we don't have an existing policy around it. So we ask people to do the best that they can, to submit all of the components of an application and the requirements of that, and to best respond to the questions. It's also come up in the panel process, right? What do we do? How will we know if somebody's using AI? How do we approach that from, a ranking process in that? And again, we are trying to be a little, sort of guide, but at the same time, not make any strong recommendations, because there is no strong policy for that at this time in terms of very explicit policy internally as an agency. So, read again with an eye towards, are they meeting the criteria of the guidelines, sort of, and use your own judgment. So it remains to be seen when we actually go through this current grant process, which we're moving towards our awarding our 25-26 grantees, what that looks like in terms of a review of the applications, the rankings, and the final decision making around that. So I think in terms of the benefits, it's out there. We don't tell people not to use it, so that can be an opportunity for them. And the challenges are, that we don't have necessarily clear guidance, especially also for our panelists as well, who are really, really a key component of the grant making process. And lastly, I would say, when it comes to even using AI, it does take some level of, not necessarily skill, but how to navigate the tools that are out there. And I'll give a good example, which is when you put in some queries for things, and there are things that come back with data references, and I'm sure the NASA team knows this too. Honestly, AI can make stuff up. So referencing specific things that sound really great, like this study done in this year by this agency, have to be vetted and verified beyond the AI tool. So there are things like that that I do feel like remain a challenge, especially when we get out into our rural areas with small organizations with lower technological skill, that there are still challenges if one wants to take advantage of AI.
And just to piggyback on that, we do see some of that. I have to say though, even without AI, people don't fact check nearly enough. And so we always recommend that they fact check and have somebody read their grant application well before they turn it in. I know a lot of artists don't take that advice, but it's a really good idea to have somebody read it and to double check all your numbers and facts, because the panel will notice and deduct points. And I have deducted points for that too before. Also, we don't, it's not across the board, so we don't allow AI usage at all for small works on paper, which is our touring exhibit. But when we're talking about applying for artist services specifically, not like visual arts exhibits, or I don't know, you're not looking to, we wouldn't want you to develop your entire curriculum based on AI, but being able to have a springboard or a jumping off spot is often very useful for individuals.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matthew, anything to add to this one?
I would only add just yes, absolutely. I was actually playing with AI on my own personal time, not on my work computer. Um, but I was asking it some random questions, and one of the questions was about like who is the representative of like who are the Congress people that represent California, and then one of the names that popped up was Dianne Feinstein, who, as we all know, passed several years ago. And so, yeah, like that's the only anecdote that I would add as far as like when you're using AI to develop any kind of curriculum or get answers for something, like it's a good starting place, as was mentioned in chat. But it's not always something that you can just guarantee is going to be right, because you might ask it for a question of like who's your representative today, and it gives you someone who died several years ago. So things like that are in terms of its practical use, it's got its uses, but also you have to do your own follow-up. That's all I would add to that.
Thanks. Yeah. All very poignant potential pitfalls and potential advantages that we're in the midst of. So, kind of along the lines of serving constituents, right? So, grantees, large majority of grantees are going to be nonprofit organizations in the state arts agency field, but we are also serving artists and the creative workforce in different ways. And so I wanted to bring this question to the panel here. How do you see AI affecting artists and the creative workforce in your state? That's a very broad question, but Rebecca, I'll hand it over to you first.
Thanks. So we've been going through, California Arts Council has been working with the statewide advisory work group on creative economy strategic framework. More to come in the next few weeks on that. And AI came up a lot in the conversation with the work group that had representatives from the nonprofit, academic, foundation, gaming sectors, obviously film and television as well as producing arts organizations and art service organizations. And, there was a lot of discussion around intellectual property and things that Chelsea talked about as well, in particular, not just around transparency, but actually in terms of remuneration for services. How do people get paid? This is really a significant thing, especially, California as being at least the film industry is now pervasive across the United States, but certainly is still very strong and a very important part of the creative economy here. And creative workers, right, go between for-profit and nonprofit all the time in terms of their industry and their individual artistic practice. So all of that is to say is that the unions in many ways are really ahead of the game in trying to assert support systems and protections when it comes to intellectual property. And there are a number of different strategies that we've also discussed as part of this plan. What can be done from a state policy level? Because a lot of it does happen in the private sector in terms of use of this and the effect on one's income. And that's kind of, how do we as a state agency or state government and even local government support and protect for that when it's basically been individual workers and groups of workers who have really had to advocate for protections around that. And that has to do with authorship, right? And that has to do again with getting paid for the exact authorship and when, what is that relationship? I could go on, but it's a big, big topic. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And then um, Matthew, I know this is more in Rebecca's wheelhouse in California, but anything else to add?
Oh no, I was just gonna add, I mean, when it comes to digital art and the effect on the creative workforce, um, if anyone remembers NFTs from back in the day, where people had those little art things and they'd screenshot them, sell them for millions of dollars on the internet. I thank God that fad's over. But I mean, but it was a very similar issue that we're seeing now with AI, where there were people who literally would screenshot a digital image, turn it into an NFT, sell it for $1 million. The artist would make $0, not even knowing that their art was being sold online for all this money. Um, and with AI, with certain generative AI, there were AI picks and pulls from things that exist and then creates something. And so creating art, it's not a whole lot different than that NFT situation. And I think was it SB 948 or something? AB, SB, either way. But there's a bill that's going to be going into effect next year. And I believe it was referenced earlier, but having to do with watermarking, generative AI uses in art that gets created, that accompanies if they make money off of it. But um, at the same time, whenever it's always going to be harder to enforce and keep up with whatever the new AI technology is. And so, the more and more that our creative folks are impacted by things like this, the more they're probably going to end up being reliant on, services and policies that our organizations will probably be, having to sort of to enforce on their behalf. So that's all I would say to that.
Great, thanks. Scarlett.
Thanks for the link. That's cool. Um, I know well, I've talked a lot about artists anyway, but I think the number one concern is theft of their own property and reuse and just sort of being replaced. There's a lot of fear in Arkansas, I would think, among individual artists and some writers too, about what that's going to mean and for the future and the future landscape. I don't see a lot of that changing or there being a lot of legislative to really address those issues in Arkansas. Just not the landscape that I would think that we would do that. We did have legislation on copyright, which was mentioned earlier, and that was more if you are here and you create the content by putting it into AI and generate it, that it is yours or it belongs to the company for whom you are working at the time of that service. So, um, yeah.
Yeah is right. There is certainly a
Yeah.
lot
Just
more. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I would just only add to it because I was reading one of the bills earlier that was passed, and it had to do with companies using generative AI, and I'm not sure what the exact impact would be on the state, but I am curious to see how things roll out, involving because it said that in terms of enforcement, it was only if that company had users online in California that had access to what was digitally created. And that's just a California specific policy. And we talked about federal policies earlier. But if someone gets a fine from California because they have that, that's one thing. But if 13, 14, 15 other states have similar policies, and this company gets a fine from 15, 16 different states or whatever, like I'm curious how that sort of domino impact is going to be just on like a legal side, in terms of how are these, if an artist uses AI to whatever degree, like are they going to need legal representation for all these different avenues and jurisdictions and districts? I don't know. It's just a question that I just thought of right now, but I'm curious to see how this enforcement and policy rolls out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matthew, and I think speaks a little bit to the to Chelsea's presentation as well, right? There's a policy environment, but there's also going to be a legal environment governing this, and how those things play out over the long term is going to have significant impacts for artists and who benefits from the technology, because there's ways that artists can really benefit from the technologies, and there's really ways that they can be exploited by those technologies as well. And I think good for us to see all angles of that, and good for us to it's informative, I think, to dip our toes into the water of this conversation and talk about how it affects state arts agency constituencies.